All righty. And
Okay.
you know what, Tess? I forgot your horse's name.
Oh gosh, no worries. Sochi,
Sochi.
Sochi. Yeah.
That's right, Sochi. Okay, so Tess and Sochi. And you've been continuing on the long reins. Are you riding
Yes.
her at all, or it's all groundwork?
So still all groundwork. I got on her just one time, actually just bareback and in the halter with like two lead ropes for reins, just because there's a bunch of stuff with her that's emotional around the tack, and it's also I can feel more bareback. So Um, and I didn't, she just went so much into extension with my weight on her back. And I just sat on her for 5 minutes, felt if I could help it out, felt if one direction was easier than another, and it would get a little bit better. But in the back of my head, I was like, I think it's still too early.
Okay.
And so I feel closer now. And sometimes I'm overly cautious, so we can just
No,
flag that.
that's the perfect way to test it is
Okay.
especially if she has issues with the girthing or the bit or anything like that, is just once in a while pop on bareback and just see how she responds. And one of the things I'll do often in rehab, like a lot of horses actually have PTSD, like
Yeah.
flat out. I don't know how else to put it.
Yep, nope, that's
And
going on there for sure.
and I'll take them all the way back to what I do with baby horses that are just being ridden for the first time. I'll spend a lot of time at the mounting block, just getting on and off, and really looking for that relaxation response with me. Like I stand on the mounting block, and if they don't want to come up and offer the back, then they're already telling me they're worried about being ridden. So I do all of my mounting task from the top of a mounting block. And when they get comfortable bringing me their back, then I'll get on and off. And every
Mhm,
time I get on, if they have a little bit of a like reaction or a stress response,
mhm.
then I get back off and I just like I break it down into a million pieces until they can kind of relax with just getting on.
And I think I do need to just treat it as a total restart because we used to be pretty good about all that. Pretty good means every once in a while we'd still show some stress symptoms about I want to walk away from the block as soon as you get on, or
Yeah.
immediately my back drops and my head goes up and my eye changes. But it has gotten before I started this type of work, it got bad. And that's partly what led me to think, all right, what am I doing? This is not okay for the mare. I
Something's
need
wrong. Yeah.
so I think it probably does make sense at the start or the end of some of the long lining, just go hang out with her there.
Yeah.
And just start to see, does she present herself to me? Does she try to walk away? I'm not swinging a leg over every time we're here.
There's a
Yeah.
ton of power because the way especially if horses have had chronic stress in the past and it's related to the balance, of course, but it can become like a memory to a horse is as real as if it's still happening. So the only way to authentically work through any stress response is you have to kind of go to the scene of the crime. Like I go, you have to go there and change the emotional response in that specific context of where it's triggered. And so after your sessions, just going and you sitting on the mounting block and letting her hang out. Step one, maybe you could stand up on the mounting block and just pet her until she has a relaxation response. Like you can break it down into so many easy steps that what you're doing is you're starting to associate because you don't know if like when they go into extension, it's only for two reasons. They're under stress emotionally or they're physically unstable.
Mhm.
And so you're working on the stability part with the long reins, but you may still have to address the emotional trigger.
Absolutely. And then, of course, the irony is that even if she was only going into extension when I put my weight on her back because it was emotional, then of course she feels worse anyways because
Yeah,
she
you
can't
still disrupt the
balance.
balance. Yeah. And I go, that's why the learning frame of mind to me is so important because in extension is the physiological stress response. Like you can't get away from that posture in use as long as the horse feels either unsure or unstable.
Right.
Like it happens for both reasons. And so to me, taking the time to change that emotional state whenever I find my horse is triggered by something, that right there, that specific thing becomes the training.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes total sense.
Yeah.
So I can definitely just, yeah, break that down into smaller steps because sometimes I notice that like if I think of getting on her, I dread it because I don't want to cause her discomfort and I don't like doing that to her. And then this is a
And
way
so
to
the two of you are kind of getting tense before you even start. Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So just you can never break things into too small of a step. And I go, especially when it comes to helping horses overcome stress, especially chronic stress, you can't overdo the easy stuff.
Yeah,
Like you just can't put them in the relaxation response too long or too often. It's just not possible.
for sure. No, it would be great to be able to have more ability to help her get there in the situations that are harder. So
Yeah. And that, while you're not planning to ride her, it's a time game. So you may as well add on 5 or 10 minutes at the end of your groundwork session and go, we're just going to go hang out on the mounting block.
totally. No, thank you.
Because I don't know if you saw the videos I did with Rarely Wrong with trailer loading.
Trailering, I do that. I was very relieved to see you do that with a horse because I do that as well with my mare with the trailering. And everyone's like, what the hell are you doing? And I'm like, just let us be. Thank you.
Yeah, and it
Yeah,
was so interesting because it was still a little bit theoretical, but I didn't have the use of actually putting her in the trailer
right.
for like 3 weeks. And at the end of the 3 weeks of just sitting there every day, she had no trouble getting on. Like we went bam.
That's
As soon
huge.
as we had the truck again, she was in easily within a week.
Awesome.
So,
Awesome.
okay, so these are the newer videos. And
Actually, the reverse. So yeah, the outdoor is the older. I think that's about 2 weeks ago.
oh,
And
okay.
then the indoor ones, and
Oh,
it
I'm
doesn't
at the
really
bottom of
matter.
the page. Nope, I'm just
There
at
you
the
go.
bottom of
Yep.
the page. Okay.
Perfect.
Yeah, I
And then it
figured
doesn't
this
matter, just
out.
one direction. The obviously.
There we go. She's a beautiful mare, by the
So
way.
it's so funny because like, oh, thank you. Yeah, she knows it, but no, she's yeah, she's a really attractive mare for sure. It's funny because like I've been working a lot on slowing myself down, but when I
Hmm.
saw to keep better consistency over the feel of the long reins, but when I saw myself on the video, I kept seeing moments where it still wasn't enough. I was like, ah, okay.
That was the first thing I noticed. So
Yep.
I don't know why it's having trouble loading right now.
Looks like it's coming back.
I didn't touch anything and it just wants to load for a minute. So, yeah, that
Weird.
was the first thing I noticed. So, right away, by trying to keep the coils in your hands, I tend to let the excess drag behind me, especially if I'm ground driving,
Yeah.
because it gives me the ability to really receive that feel in the reins. And then also, I understand if you're carrying a whip, if she loses forward, but with all that excess line coiled in your hands and the
And
whip, it's
yeah.
hard
And I have really
to,
small hands, so it's just hard. Yeah.
yeah, so it's hard to receive that feel. Let
Yeah.
me, hang on, let me try this again. Why is it doing this? It worked fine yesterday when I tested it. Let
That's
me, tr
always the way.
I know, right? Please try again later.
Do you want to try maybe one of it
Let me
might be
try
all
the other one. Maybe because I opened it before. I don't know. Yeah, so even the little bit we're kind of getting to see, um, think of it this way.
that's a dramatic
What
example for sure.
what
Yeah.
what gives her the resistance? Resistance is what they're missing in their, like when they're in long and low or extension, they have no ability to resist the propulsion that they're creating with their own hind legs. And so they can't control their body weight from falling forward. So
Mm.
extension, they tighten and shorten all the muscles to gain stability, where in long and low, they just sort of fall forward because those same muscles find length. But in both postures, they lack the ability to resist their own body weight with every stride. So So when you're on the long reins, the purpose of slowing down to the point that you feel like they're sort of tugging your elbows open.
Yeah,
And
for
I
sure.
imagine like you're nailing it once in a while, like right there where the reins are just below her belly. That, that's usually about the right amount of tension.
Gotcha. Okay.
But if you're creating that force through the reins with a shortening arm, you're actually changing the direction of force that she feels.
Yep. She needs to
So,
feel it versus me versus me take it back.
right. And you
Yeah.
can kind of feel it like if you just put your hands on the table, like if you take your palms and you flatten them and you put them on the table in front of you,
Yep.
if you shorten your arm muscles, like if you're going to kind of show off your guns, if you
Yep.
shorten your arm muscles, you feel how your hands pull towards you.
Yes.
Okay. So now if you lengthen your arm muscles and tighten them, your hands go away from you.
Yep.
You feel that? That's
Yep.
what the horse feels on their head.
Gotcha.
So most horses, like we try to be kind to their head or their mouth by having a loose rein, but we end up shortening our arms. And what
Yeah.
that does is it creates a pulling sensation to the horse because it's a
Yep.
backwards direction. And so, what really helps them, especially, and this is a good opportunity to improve your rein use through the long rein work on the ground.
I was gonna say this is a huge issue under saddle. Like she is a very good tattletale under saddle. That head comes straight up if I have any backward force, and I can think it, and it will happen.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so, two reasons you want to keep playing with your own speed is if you find you're having to pick up the reins to keep the contact,
Mhm.
you're too fast and you're creating that backwards feel.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then, like just there, your arms are perfect.
Okay.
I don't want to monkey with this video because it's being,
No, no, no. Absolutely. Play well.
yeah, I'm just going to
Love
let it
it.
play through.
Yep.
But there, even when you pick up the arms to make a correction, like if you didn't have to fuss with all that extra
That's,
line,
yeah.
you
Yeah.
would have that sensation of her tugging your arms forward. And where you're creating the resistance, ground driving, or even on circles on the long reins, is actually still through your back and your torso, just like riding.
Hiding.
Your
Gotcha.
your
Okay.
core, your torso, your back. So your
Mhm.
arms are not actually what's creating the resistance. Your arms sort of feel like they're part of the reins.
Yeah.
But when you slow your body down, and you can even use a little bit of tone in your back and your core muscles to make her basically pull you like a plow a little bit, but you're an easy plow. You're like a plow on roller skates. So
Gotcha.
you're not hard to pull forward. But that resistance is what she lacks in her body. So that's how you're supporting her, building the right muscles, the right muscle use to start to stabilize her pelvic engagement, the stability of her spine, all of that.
Yeah.
And that's the importance of it. So just knowing the difference that we don't have to shorten our arm muscle or our arm muscles very much. Like as soon as there's a shortening contraction called concentric, right? And there's a lengthening contraction called eccentric.
Hmm.
And so anytime our body goes into a shortening muscle use, concentric, the direction of force comes towards our center.
Gotcha.
So
Okay.
what that creates is always if we were holding hands with somebody, it would feel like pulling them towards us,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
So everything we do with the horse, whether it's on the ground or especially when we ride, we can contract to our full content as long as it's in length and we never go against the horse.
Yeah. Yep.
Does
Okay.
that make sense?
Yeah.
So if we need muscle and power, we just want to make sure. I think of when I'm riding, I just lengthen my body vertically
Mhm.
and sort of tell all my muscles to lengthen and then tighten.
And
And you
that would be eccentric, correct?
that's eccentric. And so you can play with that on the long reins
Yeah. I think it's
and slowing the speed and playing with that eccentric contraction you'll start to create the resistance on the reins. Yeah, and like this is good because she couldn't quite do the circle. She
Yeah.
lost forward, which was fine.
Yep.
What that tells you is that the engagement's hard for her,
Yep. And
right?
it's amazingly variable day to day, but we can kind of get into that a little
And
later.
here, that looseness on the inside rein means you need her off the wall a little bit because to straighten the inside rein, her head would have to be to the outside. And this is something I have to explain a lot on the long reins. Um, so here, there she pulls on the inside line and her head is to the outside. So I want to take a minute to just explain this because
That would be great. Yep.
when you start the working on the inside, first
Yeah.
of all, when you're behind her, you're more directly influencing spinal alignment. So you're reducing lateral bend is sort of the main support.
Mhm.
And that is still important for her. And if you play with what we just talked about, you may find that she keeps her neck long more consistently.
Right. Right.
And
And
by the time she starts falling into long and low during ground driving, that's a sure sign you need to switch to the inside.
gotcha.
Okay. And as soon as you switch to the inside on the long reins, you have your inside rein that never adjusts length and your outside rein that gives all the aids. And the reason I do it that way is because what you're feeling is you're feeling the effects of spinal rotation more than you're feeling lateral bend effects. Does that
Mhm.
make sense?
Yep.
So it's a different function of the spine and it's a biggie
Do you
for,
mind? Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
no, I was just going to say, go ahead.
Um, do you mind, and this might not be this black and white, but if I break down a little bit, like if when we're tracking, I'll give an example, and this will
Hmm.
hopefully make more sense. If as we're tracking right, and of course I start to feel a tug on my outside, so left rein, um, in my mind, the easiest way for me to interpret that, and I think it's not always correct at all, is that the hunches have fallen or pushed a bit out to the left, but should I rather think of it as the rotation would be dorsal tips left? This is where I get,
So this is where the mechanics meets physics,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
is what you're feeling through the long reins is force. What you're
Mhm.
actually feeling is her body weight shifting left and right. So you're feeling the effects of rotation,
Okay.
but how the horse actually coordinates the rotational dysfunction is a complete wild card.
Okay. It's a like very large piece puzzle, right?
Because if we talk about like ideally that twisting motion, the dorsal tips are stabilized upright
Mm-hmm.
and they cease twisting left and right. That's the ideal balance. Now, on the way to that, they can go just to the right. They could put the dorsal tips of the spine left, and that's called inverted rotation. But they can also put the dorsal tips of the spine too far right, and
Mm-hmm.
that's excessive rotation.
Okay.
And they can still go back and forth, which would be called hyperrotation.
Okay.
So you have all three of those variables regarding rotation, and the horse can change every 5 minutes. They can be super stuck in one of those options, or they can be sort of shifting between those three options. And it can change when you change direction.
Totally. And I
So,
mean, it feels like I've seen some hyper felt more, some hypermobile horses change even faster than that.
oh yeah, like
Okay.
almost
Like
faster than you could say it out loud.
absolutely. Like stride to two strides here, one stride where you just are always saying something's changing, but you can't verbally track it.
Yes.
Okay.
And the most interesting part about spinal extension, the spine pushing down, is it has two significant side effects that are always, always happening at the same time. One is hyperrotation,
Mm-hmm.
and the other side effect is a backwards disengagement of the pelvis.
Mm-hmm.
So those two things always happen, even if the horse is dropping the back a few degrees, not even a lot. And that's where her primary posture is still that.
Mhm.
She's gaining more stability with long and low, but she's still resorting into that extension mode as her most prevalent posture. And so what that tells you
Very
is
much.
hyperrotation, again, it could be symmetrical, back and forth fast and equal, or it could be asymmetrical, more
Yeah.
inverted, more towards the inside. But all of that is the part that is super unique to each horse and unpredictable.
Gotcha.
So that's why I went, ooh, that's a bit like, what do I do with that? Right.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
then I realized no matter how the horse specifically coordinates, it still ultimately creates a too much weight to the left or the right.
Right.
And that's what we're actually feeling in the long reins. And this took me probably a decade to figure out because I couldn't understand why, if the inside rein is straight, so I consider myself the point of the circle,
Mhm.
even if it's a moving circle, and the inside rein was the radius, and the tension in the inside rein is changed by the horse.
Mhm.
And it took me forever to understand because I go, how can the horse's head be bent to the outside
And I can have stuff on my inside rein. Yeah.
and the
Yeah.
inside rein is loose? I
Yeah.
go, I'm obviously not feeling the skeleton and I'm not feeling the front end. What am I feeling? Because if the horse puts the head to the outside, you should have a tight rein.
Yeah. I mean, it's what
So I go,
makes
I'm
it
not
fun.
feeling mechanics, I'm feeling something else.
Hmm.
And what I'm feeling is body weight, right?
So
So
at
when
my
the
height,
head,
go
so
ahead.
when the lumbar and pelvis are very unstable and disengaged, typically tracking right, the body weight will fall forward to the right front.
Mhm.
That's what's putting the slack on the inside rein.
Okay.
So when I pull the outside rein, even if like the head going to the outside is just it's kind of a side effect.
Mhm.
I don't worry about it. I used to
Yeah.
worry about it a lot because what I see over and over, especially with upper level riders, is we understand that the spine needs to be straight and we need to stabilize rotation. The hardest place to stabilize rotation, I think, for the horse that's been an extension is through the lumbar, sacrum, and pelvis.
Yeah.
And what I find is if the neck has to go to the outside in order to get my radius straight, that's all I'm
Yeah.
doing. I'm keeping my radius straight, right? And I'm pulling the hindquarters towards me. The effect of the outside rein coming around the hindquarters very directly, what it does is the horse has to take a lateral stride with the hind legs that effectively levels the lumbar, sacrum, and pelvis. So I'm actually correcting the rotational issue from the lumbar through the sacrum first. And
When you say
then
lateral
what?
stride there, does that mean that obviously we're pulling the left hind medially and then
Mhm.
the right hind laterally? Is that
Yes.
okay? All right. Just make, yeah.
And and
It's,
even though on a circle that's sort of backwards,
but you're
I
still prioritizing stabilizing the,
yeah,
the
even though it's a backwards leg movement technically for a correct circle, that that widening, that pulling the hindquarters towards us, even if the neck is bent to the outside,
yeah.
has the effect of leveling off the pelvis and the low back.
Yeah.
And that's where I see most upper level people get stuck.
Yep.
That there, it's very difficult to correct those rotational issues in the lumbar and pelvis. And I even started calling it a lateral disengagement when you
Mhm.
can see the hindquarter tilting side
Yep.
to side.
Yep.
So that widening of the hind legs, when you pull that outside rein to get the inside rein straight, that's really your only objective. That's it. As soon as the inside rein is straight, you quit pulling the outside rein. And
Gotcha.
as soon as the horse pulls on the inside rein, you're letting the hindquarters out.
Gotcha. That's
So
when
what
you,
you're really doing has more to do with physics, and the mechanics take a while to maybe wrap your head around because you're literally working back to front.
And I think too, what I was getting too hung up on was not thinking in terms of lines of force and thinking in terms of biomechanics.
Yes, I know,
Yeah.
me too. And that's where it's almost the more educated we are with
It's
biomechanics,
bad. Yeah, it doesn't
what
help us.
I'm seeing is we're not getting much of a better result.
Right.
So
I'm trying to not freak out as I'm pulling her inside hind leg like crazy, to way to the inside on the circle, knowing that that's not where the foot should go, but also seeing the positive results from it. And my brain's breaking, and then I'm
I
not
know.
training the animal. And then I'm just like, now I'm fucking up on the long line. So I'm
Welcome to my world.
yeah, I can only
Like
imagine. So I'm very lucky that you have gone through the struggle
20,
substantially.
like this has been a go-to exercise that's been like my secret weapon of rehab for, I don't know, like 20 years, right? But it probably took 15 years before I could explain it. And none of my mentors liked it. They all told me, never do this. And all of my clients were having amazing results.
Right.
And so I was in
Can't
this
fight
like,
that.
now I can finally explain it in mechanical terms. But what I realized, and this was the big deal that I couldn't wrap my head around, is we're feeling body weight shift through the reins.
Yeah.
We are not feeling we're feeling the result of the mechanical changes. But the good news is it's either shifting to the front left leg or the front right leg, and the
Simple. Yeah.
inside rein tells
Yeah.
me, right? No matter the details of how that horse, because that was the complicated part. I go, you can't predict how any single horse is going to stabilize dysfunctionally.
Yeah.
The only thing you can predict is how all horses balance, ideally.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
how they discover imbalance is crazy. It's, and horses are able to do things that I didn't think were mechanically feasible.
And stay on their four legs. Yeah.
And yet they did
Or
it.
upright rather. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I've really switched into understanding the mechanics. Yes, we have to have that mental understanding. But when we're actually working with the horse, everything shifts into the feel of the physics because it's the forces of motion that guide the coordination. We don't actually influence the skeletal coordinations very directly.
Right.
It's too deep and it's too complicated,
Yep.
right?
Okay.
So whenever you feel her put slack on that inside rein,
She's
and
too much on the right front.
basically the weight is tipping towards you.
Yep.
And
Yep.
so what you're doing by pulling the hindquarters towards you is you're taking the front end away.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time that they have to take kind of a lateral stride with the hind legs because you're pulling them off balance, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's that widening of the hind legs that gives them a sudden stability of rotation through the lumbar, sacrum, and pelvis.
That's super helpful right there because I kept being like, but what's the mechanism that they gain stability by? Okay.
It's actually the result we're looking for is up higher. And because I went through all the same process you're questioning, I go, how can it be the head's to the outside? How can it be the legs moving the wrong way as being
Yeah.
beneficial? Like I didn't get it. And so it's really what you're doing is you're stabilizing, you're getting the uprightness through the lumbar and the sacrum, and you're taking lateral forces off the SI joint.
Gotcha.
So you're stabilizing the pelvic bones as well. And so every time she puts slack on the inside rein, don't be shy about pulling that hindquarter towards you. And if you keep your eye up here,
Yep.
suddenly the feel of the reins and what you're doing starts to make visual sense.
Gotcha.
You start to see
Definitely
it.
had moments. It's just they're very short-lived, largely due to my lack of technique here. But yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And I want to see if I can. I want to see if I can rewind this video a little bit. I don't want to comment. Get out of there, you stupid window. Let's see if it. Oh, yeah, it worked. Okay. Because this video, you're going from ground driving to circle to just walking
I
on the
moved my
inside rein, which I love. And so
It's like
Like,
sometimes I get better results with the circles, but that day it was harder on the circles. So I moved away from it again. And then I
and
couldn't go ahead.
the most fascinating part of the circles is even if the horse starts with an outside bend, I've also had horses literally move sideways on the circle as they're restabilizing pelvic engagement. And they, every single horse, I just keep doing the same thing, following the feel of the inside rein. As the lumbar and pelvis stabilize, all horses straighten out their neck
Mm.
and keep tension on the inside rein, which tells me their balance is now more equalized left to right.
Because in the end, it's as simple as we want 50-50 in the feel of the
Hmm.
rein. Yeah, okay. Okay. Just
Hmm.
making
Yeah. And
yeah.
when you start, if the hindquarters are laterally disengaged and they've been in extension, you have hyperrotation, then anytime a horse has very unstable lumbar pelvis sacrum, they're going to have an outside bend. I go, and the discrepancy between the feel of the two reins is going to be drastic.
Big. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
as the hindquarters stabilize, a couple of things happen. When the horse feels their own stability, they straighten out their own neck without putting slack in the rein.
Hmm.
And they start to, what else was I going to say? They straighten out the neck. I guess
That's
they shift
okay.
into long and low. I thought there was something else I was going to say. But if you kind of watch the top of the croup and the low back, what you're
Mhm.
actually feeling in your hands will make a lot more sense than if you watch the neck.
Yeah.
If you
Yeah.
watch the front end, it's really confusing
Yeah.
it-
Yeah.
because you're feeling what's actually going on in the hind end.
And I
And
think you like what's ironic, you kind of got at this earlier, but about, trying to educate yourself a lot on biomechanics or being a professional in the industry yourself is that I'm walking around totally in my head, out of my body, trying to feel something in her. And it just doesn't go together. I think it's
it doesn't
almost,
mesh. Hmm.
yeah, it doesn't mesh at all. And then I'm not actually present where I need to be with being able to just get the loops of the reins out of my hands, be more attuned to what she's doing so I can walk better at her pace, have a consistent feel, and then actually feel versus
Yes.
yeah, being like, what is happening? I'm so confused, but I see it working, but it's confusing. Yeah.
And so are you a professional trainer, rider?
Coach and rider. Yeah.
Okay.
But more like moving out of the realm of traditional dressage, but I was very, very long time in the realm of traditional dressage.
Okay. So this
Um,
is a
like
massive
traditional competitive
paradigm.
dressage. Oh yeah,
Yes.
this is a fucking huge. Sorry for everyone for running.
Yes. No, it's
But yeah,
fine.
it's been this horse has been the only thing that's brought me out of that world, and it's been deeply appreciated because nothing I knew worked on her.
Yeah.
Absent, she was just not going to tolerate the way I traditionally knew how to ride and
I,
train.
that is
Yeah.
just so beautiful because it is actually, that's been everybody's story, my story included, that it's when you just realize that this isn't working for this horse, you start seeking more information rather than selling the horse, blaming the horse, beating the horse into it, all of that. So when we think about like right here, you can kind of
Yeah.
see she's a little dropped here. She's
On
not
the
in motion, but she's in extension.
yeah.
So if we sort of translate mechanics to physics, when the horse actually has what I call internal straightness, which is what you're developing on the long reins, and we need a minimal amount of pelvic stability, even if we don't call it engagement, to get them out of extension into my transitional expected posture of long and low.
Yeah.
Like I go, don't love long and low, but coming out of extension, I see it's a necessary step because the muscle use is opposite of
Yeah.
extension.
They have to let go. Yeah.
They have to, and they not only have to do that, they have to build up a little bit of the deeper core muscles that support that axial stability.
Can that build up
So,
somewhat in long and low?
yes,
Okay. Okay.
in
Gotcha.
long and low is where you're beginning to build the muscular support for axial stability
Okay.
and engagement.
Okay.
It's only just the rudimentary beginning, but I find it's a super important step when horses have been chronically in extension.
Yeah.
They have their strength in all the wrong places.
Yeah.
They're
Yeah.
strong in the outer muscles, they're very weak in the core.
Yeah.
They're very strong muscularly, they're very wobbly and unstable skeletally.
Yeah.
And that's how they've been surviving.
Yeah.
And so in this posture, what we feel, which is why you're getting these drastic changes on the long reins, is this posture creates both a backwards and lateral disengagement of the pelvis. So we see the pelvic bones move a lot.
Mhm.
The side effect of dropping the back is hyperrotation, could be symmetrical, asymmetrical. So the midline feels like a noodle, or it feels like it's always one-sided, or it
Yep.
feels, all of those different things. So what we feel is the midline is not a stable straight line of force.
Yeah.
And what I realized is when you get the proper alignment, which is not mechanically straight, and when you stabilize rotation, which is never 100% stable, it does generate a broomstick straight line of force from pole to tail.
Yeah.
And I go, that line of force, the physics tells me I have the mechanics.
Yeah.
Does that
And
make
when you
sense?
have, yes. And when you have that broomstick straight line of force, that's when the body weight gets distributed 50-50,
Yes,
right?
we're at least 50-50 left to right. We're
Yep, right.
still too much on the forehand.
Right. I still got 60-40 or whatever it may be, but yep, but laterally speaking,
But I
50-50.
find most concussive lameness issues are not going to be bilateral. They're going to be one-sided. And so a lot of lameness issues are related to this problem with bending and rotation.
And just because it's when you had mentioned lameness issues and it just popped into my head, one thing I've been noticing, because I usually don't film this stuff or watch it back, and she has bell boots on, so it's a little hard to tell, but is she has a significant toe first landing, like on all four legs, but especially the front. And I'm assuming that that's, I know partly we can talk about hoof balance with that, but is that something I just should see what this work does over time? Because
Yeah.
we've radiographed the feet and they're in pretty good balance, but I feel like it's to do with everything up above as far as how the legs are actually moving.
No, some of my best supporters are farriers and body workers because they're
Yeah,
the ones who tell my clients first how
yeah,
much the horse is changing. And it's long before my clients can see the changes in their own horse. But the
right.
farrier goes, "What are you doing? This
This
horse is
feels,
no longer crushing the left heel. What are you
yeah,
doing?
yeah,
This horse is starting to grow heel or
yeah,
isn't slipping out on the toes."
that's super
And
cool.
so the kinematics of the legs is dictated by the coordination of the axial skeleton. And that's why I focus where I do, because joint function, hoof growth, concussive forces, all of that is dictated with the skull, spine, rib cage, and pelvic use.
Yeah. Okay.
And so that's why, like that shift, this is pretty good on the circle. And you
Yeah, and there are
might,
some where it's this way almost from the start and gets even better, but and then this was just a hard day where this is very little and she goes in and out of extension a ton. But what's the
yeah. So when she's in extension and you can visibly see her shorten the neck muscles, you're going to start correlating that to the looseness on your inside rein.
okay.
And you're going to start to understand how pulling the hindquarters towards you, which makes no sense, works,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It actually works because the effect it's having is leveling the low back and pelvis first. And the more that stays level, the better my timing is to keep the inside rein straight all the
Yeah.
time, even if the head stays bent to the outside. If that inside rein is a consistent radius with my support on the outside rein, pretty soon I see that stability, that lack of movement go from the tail to the croup to the low back to the barrel to the shoulders, and then the neck straightens out. And I
Yeah.
just watch it travel up the body back to front.
I would pay a lot of money for your eye. I might get a bit closer, but it's an impressive eye you have.
Just
Yeah.
it comes from thousands of hours of
I
standing
do.
in the middle of a circle watching horses. It's
Yeah.
I think when you understand the mechanics, the piece that was maybe missing for you was relating that relating mechanics to forces of motion. That
Yeah.
I think is the missing piece in our industry
Yeah.
is physics are generated directions and amount of forces, right? So if we think of physics, forces of motion always have direction and magnitude. So the direction and the magnitude tell me about the coordination.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? And
Absolutely.
and so this, if my horse has excessive lateral bending, too much rotational movement, an unstable pelvis, I'm going to get a lot of force going left and right rather than straight forward. And
Yep.
most horses that lose forward, she hasn't lost forward, so she's a more sensitive forward going horse. But most horses that aren't naturally forward, or if they have more discomfort in their body, we call them lazy.
Hmm.
But it's
And she,
that same dissipation of energy
right,
that
right.
makes forward motion uncomfortable.
Uncomfortable. And what I'd say with her forward is like the walk, absolutely, like we've remained being willing to walk. And when we have more stability than we had today, we're even willing to walk that much more forward, still in a very balanced way. But she has said no to trotting pretty kindly, but there are very few days where I feel that she actually asks for it. And if she asks for it, great. But this, that I'd say that she's lost forward in that sense. Because it's just like, that's not okay for me, not right now.
I don't think she knows how to trot except in extension, would be
It
my guess. And she
absolutely.
does not want to feel that way, so she refuses to
Right.
trot.
Yeah.
And the key to getting her to trot is right now, as I watch this video, I would say you're still, she's still 80% unstable, 20% more stable.
Yeah.
So it's moving the right direction, but she doesn't have enough axial stability to push into trot without resorting into extension.
Yep.
And she's certainly sensitive and smart enough that she's like, yeah, why go there?
Yeah. And that's a change. I mean, years ago when she was, 9, 10, 11, she was just like, I'll live my whole life in extension and, sympathetic activation. That's great.
Yeah.
So this version is a little older and wiser, which is great.
Yeah.
So
And she maybe has gotten to the point where she just doesn't have that youthful energy to sustain extension. It's now
total
costing her more. And
in
I
the other
think
video. Yeah.
sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say in the other video tracking left, there's like one moment where she used to be a very spooky, bolty horse, and where she does one of those, but she immediately just goes back into plodding along after. And so it's just a nice demonstration of, yeah, I don't really have the energy to sustain a body posture that really isn't comfortable for me anymore.
No, and what you'll find, I think it's important to mention coming out of traditional dressage is in traditional dressage, I can see where tracking up and energetically forward into the
Forward fixes
bit,
everything.
yeah,
Yeah.
that has become an obsession that is destroying horses. And
Yeah.
I just
I
want
still
to
have to work really hard
mention,
to let go of it. Yeah.
yeah, that when she starts to, which you'll probably see more when you're working on the inside with her. Try to see if I can find that moment again. When she gets in long and low, she may
Mhm.
feel heavier at first on the reins than lighter. Don't be
That's an
afraid.
accomplishment for her. Yeah, no, for her to actually go to the contact is a big deal. So I
Yes.
get you there. Yeah.
And she'll need the support when she first shifts into long and low to stay there because like I said, whether you're behind her or on the inside, what she lacks is the ability to resist propulsion and her own body weight. That's her instability. So
Mhm.
by giving her that eccentric contraction through your body. So if I'm in the middle of a circle, I'm pulling that outside rein, but I'm also sort of resisting more through my back and core than I am my inside rein or arm.
Gotcha.
Yep. And that resistance from your torso is kind of what would help her stabilize a little faster.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes a ton of
So, so working from the inside, the hard part when you're walking with her is to keep the distance the same.
aim. The distance and still, of course, the speed. It's like a double factor there.
Yeah.
Then,
And on
yeah.
the inside, you don't have to worry about the speed as much as long as you're not getting up near the shoulder, neck, or head. If you're somewhere behind the
Oh,
saddle area, you're good.
okay.
But
Okay.
when you go behind her, the speed is critical. But when you go next to her, it's the outside rein use that's more important
Gotcha.
and keeping
Gotcha.
the inside rein straight.
Okay.
So like there, where she pulls on the rein and her head went to the outside and the rein was straight, that's
I
what
need
you're
to take
looking
left
for.
rein. Yeah. And I
So
didn't take it that way.
there,
I watched my hand. Yeah.
I would be pulling the outside rein way more than you are.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I didn't even engage it. I just kind of stayed the same even when she made the right rein slack. So I definitely have
Yeah.
a much better, theoretically, right now without me doing it, I have a much better understanding of what I need to do. And then I'll try to apply it and see where I get.
So do you find she falls on the right front more than the left and is a little stickier on the left hind compared to the right? Like she
So
kind of a right-handed horse?
it is extremely dependent upon the day, but I totally get why you would ask that based on these videos.
Oh,
It can also flip flop. Um,
okay, good.
yep,
If it
yep,
flip-flops, that's good news.
it will.
Flip-flopping means you have the potential for correct. When they're kind of entrenched in their pattern, it can take a little longer to kind of deconstruct that because they've stabilized there.
Right.
And at least the good news when you're dealing with instability and they're changing which direction is easier all the time,
Yep.
then you actually have the potential for change a little more at hand. So
Good.
that's actually good news if she flip-flops back and forth.
And I
Because
like that you had like last just a friendly reminder. She also has just the EPM issue, and you would kind of re sort of structure the idea of it in my brain is that one of the silver linings is that you kind of have a fresh slate in some ways.
that's right.
Yeah.
Yes. And that explains why she's flip-flopping too, because the EPM, any old habit she had of stabilizing her body dysfunctionally, probably got wiped out
Yeah.
because the EPM makes them so unstable in a general way. And so at least all the old habits get wiped
Yeah.
out. Um, but that's probably why she wants to be so careful too. And
Yeah.
this version, I also want to point out where she sort of looks long through her neck and long and
Yeah.
level, but you can still
It's the
see
fall,
a lot of
right.
pelvic movement.
Yeah.
That's the last few degrees of her pushing the back down,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And sometimes it can be confusing. Like that's obvious the way she uses her
Right.
neck, right? She's in
Right.
extension, no big deal. But when she's sort of long and level, because my first goal before what I would call high balance, which is what you need for competition, I go a long balanced frame that used to be hunter and Western pleasure and trail riders. I go, it's a balanced frame, but it's just long and level,
Mhm.
right? And I think we get too ambitious, skipping long and level and trying to get to, elevation.
Yeah.
And we land in extension more often than not. And so when
Mhm.
she's long and level, which ultimately you're going to want to see again, is
Yeah.
like that long and low is a more authentic improvement
Yes.
than when she's long and level at this point.
And are you looking not just at, and I know it's so fleeting with her, but not just at the stability over the croup, but also a little bit like I was kind of looking at how activated or not activated, like the brachiocephalic muscles were, and if the head had a little bit of a natural soft looking sway to it. Like, should I even look at the front end other than just,
What's interesting about the front end
yeah.
is every horse does it in a unique way, and
Okay.
sometimes it gets a bit wild. Like sometimes it scared me, like I'm ruining the horse. But what you'll see is a slow transition of stability increasing from the withers to the tail, and suddenly the muscles of the thoracic sling and neck and head sort of becoming more mobile. So
Gotcha.
you see, and that transition is always happening in real time at the same rate.
Yeah.
But as long as we see where she is right now is just getting stable enough, you've increased stability through the back, rib cage, and hindquarter to the point that she's authentically lengthening the neck.
Yeah.
And I don't necessarily want to see the head nod side to side. The difference to me is to see the head, the skull, the neck lengthening should take the skull forward and away from the torso.
Okay. Okay.
It should never be coming back towards the
Right.
torso, and
Right.
it really shouldn't have a lot of left-right movement.
Okay. Gotcha.
Um, it's really that forward and away that ultimately in the higher degrees of lifting the back with spinal flexion that
Yeah.
elevates the pole. What we don't see in competition anymore, there's our girl. What we don't see is the head going forward and away.
Right.
We see
Right.
dropped poles, we see smushed necks, we see the head always coming back towards the torso, which
Absolutely.
is to me the most consistent visual factor that tells me the difference between flexion and extension.
Gotcha.
And so long and low, and one of the research papers I read, I think Deb pointed out, we did a podcast on it,
Yeah,
but
no, I saw that one. Yeah.
but long and low is like that version where she puts her nose on the ground is
Mhm.
her authentic mechanical change.
Gotcha. Yeah.
It for her, it's going to be nose on the ground version of long and low.
Yeah.
And what long and low tells us is that the spine is at least no longer actively muscularly being pushed down.
Okay.
It's beginning, so it can only go down or up. It's never really neutral.
Right.
So long and low is the beginning of up, but it's not enough up
Hmm.
to control the weight on the forehand,
Right.
right?
Right.
But it's at least, and I go, the horses I work with, that's a huge deal to say no longer going down.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I got patient with long and low, where all of my mentors are highly allergic to long and low, like hate it, hate it, hate it, right?
Mhm.
And I go, so why does the horse love it?
Yeah.
And I go, there's a muscular relief. As the axial skeleton stabilizes, the top line muscles can release concentric contraction, right? So when the spine is pushing down, it's just like us. They shorten the muscles, pulling all the energy and direction of force in and down.
Definitely. Yep.
In order to lift the back, it's eccentric
Right.
contraction, and
Right.
that changes the direction of force to go from the center outward rather than outward towards the center.
It makes so much sense.
I know. And once I got
Or
the
such a
physics,
connected feel. Yeah.
once I got
Yeah.
like directions of force and magnitude, I was like, now it makes sense.
Yeah.
Now I know how to work in a practical way with the
Yeah.
mechanics.
Well, because when you describe kind of what you know, eccentric muscle contraction does, and then you start to think about the theory you'd read in all of like the classical dressage textbooks, it totally links to that. I mean, it's
Yeah,
just that,
they're
yeah,
trying to tell us.
yeah.
Yeah. And so the way I show people too what the horse is going through is if you take just your bicep muscle and you contract it, and let's say you had it like that for years,
Mhm.
right? It's going to be really hard. What a lot of dressage, even classical dressage, is trying to do is called isotonic muscle use. So from a concentric contraction, if you contract your bicep, then you're going to keep the contraction of your bicep, but you're going to fully lengthen your arm at the same time. That
That's
is
hard.
wicked hard.
And they're doing it on 4-year-olds, or they're trying to do it on, yeah.
Right. So what I discovered was my methodology is if the horse has been in extension over time, the back muscles are doing this,
Mhm.
right?
Totally. Yeah.
So once the skeleton gets stable, if you drop your arm,
Yeah.
that's long and low.
Yeah.
You just have no work.
Yeah.
right? So that's why they fall on the forehand. But
Right.
now, if your arm is in long and low, now if you lengthen the muscles and begin contracting them and lifting your hand to your shoulder, that's so much easier. It's
Yeah.
still work,
Yeah.
right?
But
But that eccentric contraction is how they lift the spine,
yeah.
right? And those little pieces of the puzzle that, I got gained through research and like just listening and learning everything. It was like those little light bulb moments. I went, oh, now I can see there's an easier path. There's
Yeah.
an easy way to get there that's more natural for the horse.
Yeah.
But, I'm always criticized for being too slow. But I go, the body's the body.
Yeah.
I go, at least it works, even if it takes some time.
It definitely helps me to remind myself of how, the mayor's been in this posture for God knows, like over a decade. Yeah. So it's just going to take a long, long time to get her understanding that she can cope with a change and find benefit in a major change. And then especially with her nervous system being the
I
way that
don't
it is.
think you're as far away as you might feel right now. I think with even what we've talked about today,
Mhm.
making those changes on the long reins,
Yeah.
I look at her and what you've got is trust. You've got her very interested in this work. She's
Yeah.
very cooperative.
She's been very willing about this, and that's a really big deal for her.
And so she basically is on board because she's feeling the benefit. That's what convinces horses to work with us. They have to feel the benefit.
Yeah.
And you have crossed one of the first mountain ranges with this kind of horse in rehab and having EPM and being in that vulnerable state, is that she wants to follow your guidance because your guidance is helping her feel better. So now if you give her more guidance with what we've talked about on the long reins,
Yeah.
give her more resistance, be a
Yeah.
little more assertive with that outside rein, even if her neck is bent to the outside, you're going to see her stay in the posture of long and low during motion more consistently instead of the up, down that she's doing now.
Right.
You're going to start getting some consistency of motion in long and low. And as soon as you do, you're going to notice that she fatigues soon. She'll
Gotcha.
fatigue pretty early compared to her normal work time.
Okay.
And that's fine. If she fatigues and just shuts down and kind of goes, yeah, I can't give you any more at 20 minutes,
Let
fine.
it be.
Yeah,
Okay.
go rest at the mounting block and work on that for the
Yep.
rest of your time. You can always fill in with that. But I think as soon as you give her more resistance support, that she's going to stay there. She wants to be there. She feels the relief of it. And that will be the beginning. I like to see the horse in consistent long and low, which to me means the horse can hold long and low. If I can't trot, then at least at the walk for 10 to 20 consecutive minutes. Like I go, that's never going to leave the horse on the forehand for too long.
Yeah.
I go, but if I can't get 10 to 20 consecutive minutes of walking in long and low, that tells me her whole axial skeleton is still more unstable than it is stable. So
Yeah.
she's still in the process of developing that core muscle support.
Yeah.
When they can maintain long and low in the walk for 10 to or 20 to 30 consecutive minutes, I go, okay, they've got the core strength
Yep.
to now start developing impulsion and self-carriage.
Right. Right. Oh, that makes a ton of sense.
Yeah. And
But
so I begin lifting the back out of long and low by playing with engagement, speed, braking, pushing,
gotcha.
all different ways to do it other than getting in their face. So,
Right.
yeah.
Yep. Yep.
And every sort of failed dressage horse I've ever worked with, you just don't get to use the reins anymore. That is off the table.
Yep. Amen to that.
Yeah,
It's a challenge, but it's good. It's good for
but
us.
it'll teach you a lot because you suddenly realize how many other options there are to lifting the back that don't require leverage in the mouth, that don't require heavy rein aids. And it is actually what we've talked about classically for hundreds of years.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Totally. Sorry. She's, yeah. That's
that's so
such a
funny.
small portion of what she used to do.
Yeah,
So I'm
yeah.
just very well, it's so much littler. Thank you so, so
No,
much.
she is
Oh,
a beautiful and talented horse, and I think she's a horse that kind of knows her body. Like,
I agree. Yeah.
and I
Yeah.
think even with the EPM, she's coming back really beautifully with what you're doing. And I think you're going to have a heck of a horse. And
Yeah.
you're not as far away as you might feel right now. Because sometimes it's like slow, 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 or I call it, I slog on the long reins with some horses for months, and I'm still slogging with my little Arabian mare, getting her kind of recovered.
Mhm.
And then it's like all of a sudden, you sort of have this giant leap forward because you've hit kind of a critical threshold.
Yeah.
And it's like they just leapfrog forward. But the beginning, with any horse in the beginning of rehab, you're starting with the hardest, most tedious part.
Yeah. But it's helps me greatly to be slow. And it makes it easier that she has shown a huge willingness to do this type of work, and that has often not been the case in the past with other modalities that I've known. Where I
They
just didn't,
tell us,
yep. And I
they
didn't know
tell
enough to
us.
listen to her better. And now I do. And so she's like, yep, this is good.
Yeah.
We can
Yeah.
do this
And
for as long
that,
as you want to do this.
it sounds silly. Like, I've had mentors tell me, poo-poo it a little bit. But to me, the whole reason I put like the learning frame of mind in my work is because when a horse gives me a stress response and I think I'm following the best person with the best theory, doing my best application, then the horse helps me understand whether, not that it's right or wrong, whether it's appropriate
Yeah,
or
for them at that time.
inappropriate. Yes.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
So no, they speak really clearly. We just have to be able to listen. So
Yeah. And I'm just so used to now, if the horse gives me a stress response, I go, "Whoop, whoop, let's rethink this."
yeah, that's lovely.
Where it used to be, and it's still kind of conditioned into us that, oh, that's just that horse, or that's just
Yeah,
normal, or that's just
yeah.
how that they're going. And I go, yeah, they're going to physically struggle. But right now, you can see with your mare, she's physically struggling a lot with
But
very calm energy
exactly.
and like intense ears,
Yeah,
very mentally focused.
yeah, very much.
So, yeah, that always should guide you. And the tricky horses teach us that the most. But with
Absolutely.
every horse, that's actually what kind of guides and navigates what I do in any given training session is
Yeah.
that response, even if it looks terrible, if it doesn't like the outside bend didn't make sense, but the horse was
Walking
calm and
sideways.
attentive, and
Yep.
I'm like, what's going on here?
But they look happy and they're focused, and you're like, okay, it can't be that bad for them then. Yeah.
No, and
Yep.
then when I would get on them, I would feel like even you just sitting on her in conjunction with working on the long reins, you will feel a tangible difference in her strength each time you sit on her without riding her and just doing the long reins. Like that was what sold me on them was
Yeah.
the difference I felt under saddle and I had not been riding.
That's super cool.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
And you can see how that could work for sure. Yeah.
yeah.
So thank you so much for your time and expertise. And I will be probably back in touch in like 3 to 4 weeks and work on just the things we talked about because that's makes a lot of sense.
Okay.
And yeah, yeah.
And let me stop the recording.